This morning, our featured speaker is Helen Austen, and if you are new to Oasis and don't know Helen, not only is she the owner and operator of the highest-rated professional organizing company in the KC metro area, but she is also the founder and executive director of Kansas City Oasis, and the co-founder and president of the Oasis Network. So if you are new to Oasis, you might not have known this, but Kansas City Oasis is actually a member of a large network of Oasis communities across the country. Wichita, Austin, Houston. We've got 4 in Utah, Wichita, I already said Wichita, Kansas, Toronto. So wonderful network of Oasis communities we have. And Helen has a master's degree in human services and a graduate certificate in professional counseling, and just a lot of experience in community organizing and all sorts of things. To know her is to love her. Would you please welcome our executive director, Helen Austen.
Thanks. I want you guys to take a second and think about what you grew up eating as a child. I know, real deep question. You're welcome. So what did you eat as a child? Well, for myself, I spent most mornings eating a bowl of cereal, and then I'd have the occasional eggs, bacon, sometimes French toast. And I grew up in this small town northeast of Kansas City called Excelsior Springs. And we would occasionally go to this small town diner called Old Mill for breakfast. Old Mill smelled just like it promised, with the added benefit of cigarette smoke in the air. But despite all of that, we would go there and I would have my favorite breakfast of all time. Biscuits and gravy, right? Yeah, gotta love us Midwest folk. I guess there's a difference between Southern and Midwestern one too, but I'll eat it all. All wonderful. Now, as an adult, I now see how I unknowingly have adopted this American breakfast script. Eggs, bacon, cereal, oatmeal, pancakes, basically a lot of like fat and sugar and refined sugars. So this script, can be pretty darn unhealthy, sadly enough, and probably not the best way to always start your day. So I began to try to think outside the box, which oddly led me to see that it was going to be a little more challenging for me to branch out of my breakfast script. Now, one script that I began to look at was a Japanese breakfast script. Did you know that the Japanese eat soup for breakfast? Yes, you're nodding like, yeah. Can you imagine eating soup for breakfast? I couldn't. You might as well have dessert for dinner, which sounds like a better idea to me. And then they also eat a ton of fish at breakfast. And I love seafood. I don't know how to cook it. I destroy it every time. But I would love to have fish for breakfast. I could do that. In fact, in Japan, if you go to McDonald's, their #1 selling breakfast sandwich is a filet of fish sandwich. Very different than here. And yet, even though I have began to add a few vegetables maybe to my breakfast, my heart always yearns for a good plate of biscuits and gravy. Now, society hands us many, many scripts that we didn't necessarily read or choose to adopt or memorize on purpose. And there's one script that I have no recollection of personally ever adopting. And it's that if you do not live with your fiance, your partner, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever you want to call them, that you will have a more successful marriage. Anyone else get that too? Where you just believe, you're just oh, this is what life's about, how it works, which is total bullcrap. And when we see the damage that does to a lot of people, these scripts or stories just become a part of our habits and our expectations. How to behave at a dinner table, or what you do at the dinner table, social script. Who you should or should not be attracted to, another script. How you define success, that's another script. Like all things in life, some of these scripts include the shoulds and oughts and all of those other things that, if not questioned or examined, we may go on living them without thought on how they may prevent us from living an authentic and satisfying life. There's another script that I have no recollection of adopting. And is that you're not supposed to have sex before marriage. And I was raised in this household. My parents were really liberal. Now, a conversation about sex, I remember all of them because they were super awkward. And so I would have remembered if that had come up. And then even in church, we went occasionally, like off and on. It didn't come up there. And I remember my friends talking about it, but I just had this, like, that's what you do or what you don't do. That's just how it is. And it didn't really dawn on me that that was, once again, another script that we had, something that was just in the drinking water. Now, I suggest that many of us here today share another script or a leaving of a script in common. A lot of us, now maybe not all of us, are veterans of living outside of our culture's religious script. And the challenge with living outside the religious script is that our non-closeted existence makes other people uncomfortable. Now, I don't personally wake up every morning thinking about how I'm not a Scientologist or how I'm not Mormon, and that includes how I'm no longer follow a Christian worldview. Yet, I go out of this circle. You all know me here. We're all a little Sam in some of that. Gosh, every conversation somehow almost leads to somehow my lack of belief in a higher power or whatever it may or may not be, especially with my hairstylist. She's like, so you really think that this is like it? And it's with trembling, and she's always like, and I'm happy to talk with her about it, but it always comes up. It's usually during the hair blowing time when you can't hear that well too. So you're trying to like scream, this awkward conversation where I'm trying to explain this big deal. But it always comes up. So why is that? What is it about this countercultural perspective on religiosity or the lack thereof that makes other people uncomfortable? Now, I think there's many, many reasons, so I'm just going to highlight just two here. So I know there's so much more to this. But I suggest that we inadvertently cause people to unknowingly question their own worldview, which is wrapped up in the core concept of who they are or their identity. I experienced this I had this opportunity, I've talked about it once before, where I went to a Methodist mainline Sunday school group. They invited me to talk about what we're doing here. And when I do those kinds of talks, which are incredibly rare, I always highlight what we have in common. Because the truth is, we have a ton in common. Like what we actually do and the purpose and why we exist is very similar to why they exist. They just don't usually mention that a whole lot. So at the end there was Q&A, and this one woman kept raising her hand, and the question always changed. And by the end, though, her question was, but how do you wake up in the morning? We still had gotten back. I was like, look, Oasis, we do all these great things. We volunteer, we help people. And then it came back to my lack of religiosity, but she just could not understand how I could keep on going about life. Now, the story her script told her is that in order to be happy and resilient, that you need Jesus and you need to go to church. And that's probably helped her, I hope so, has helped her throughout her life. Maybe helped her through many challenges. And it's at the core belief of who she is, her personal identity. So I can empathize with her. So even for people in a mild mainline denomination, a very liberal one, it's something they sometimes can't get their heads around. But I think it also made her uncomfortable to consider that there may be other ways to find joy and resiliency. Lastly, we tend to make people uncomfortable because being in the presence of someone who may not have a belief system surrounding an afterlife makes you think about your mortality or the mortality of your loved ones. None of us like that. Now, as Michelle mentioned, I've had the opportunity to start going around the country and helping people who have started or want to start an Oasis. And so we have a lot of side conversations, and I'll talk about just about anything. And there is a question that I'm getting pretty darn consistently that I think I'd like to go ahead and share with you today, because the script behind the premise of the question I think is important to be reframed. So people want to know this. Aren't all you KC Oasis folks poly? And does that perception worry you? So first, I'll explain what that is. First, I will share with you my response, and I'll deconstruct it for you. So here's what I think. Are we all polyamorous in Kansas City? If you don't, polyamory it is where people have multiple relationships, romantic relationships with other people, and everyone is aware of that arrangement. So, is everyone poly here? Of course not. You know, people ask these questions that are blanket statements, so I'm not going to go into that. But I think that we definitely. We have people who might identify somewhere on the scale of non-monogamy, or as Dan Savage coins it, monogamish. I think it stands out because you may see someone extend their arms around people on either side. You may see people holding hands with multiple people, you know, and this is so countercultural to what we typically see. And I assume that those levels of safe PDA are not expressions that can be done probably really anywhere else in our society, because non-monogamy is so much more controversial than being secular. So lastly, we've talked a lot about it here too, and I'm going to mention here the power of story. But when I first got to know a lot of the people who are non-monogamous, is that a word? I don't know how to say it like that. I wanted to better understand and allow people to live their authentic lives and to celebrate their life, to understand them. So we've talked about it a lot, and so that's how it's gotten around, because I just thought, bring it to the forefront. Let's talk about it. So does it worry me? That very question assumes that it's a negative thing, and it's not. I think it's a very positive thing. I think it's evidence that we are creating the kind of revolutionary community where we celebrate people's healthy life choices rather than qualifying them. So here at Kansas City Oasis, we aim to celebrate people's life choices rather than qualify them. I am thrilled that people feel comfortable here being themselves. That is a beautiful, so beautiful and wonderful thing. I wouldn't want it any other way. So whether you're straight, gay, queer, bisexual, monogamous, non-monogamous, monogamish, polyamorous, vegan, carnivore, I'm gonna throw all the labels that divide people, right? You can even be paleo, and it'll be okay. We at KC Oasis, we truly do aim to celebrate and honor you, whatever script you are on, first and foremost. We are creating a safe place to explore and be who you are, your authentic self. So this leads me to ask, what's with the desire to live authentically? So to live in your own script has a lot to do with being your authentic self. Now, this is another subject. There's lots of other things, to dive into, and I've already given my 6-minute warning, so I have to start trucking on here. So I'm just thinking out loud here, but my observations and studying lead me to think that it has a lot to do with willpower. Willpower, if you aren't familiar with dieting, is incredibly limited. Our ability to constantly make a decision or to have to think ahead is very, very exhausting. Having to think and act outside of those natural tendencies is exhausting, especially when it's because society tends to frown upon your choices. We know what that's like if you're a lack of religiosity or a food choice or your relationship structure. It's absolutely exhausting to constantly make sure you're staying on society's script. And we can only build healthy and positive relationships when we are able to be vulnerable with other people. That is a form of authenticity. And to be authentic, you must also be vulnerable, which then also requires us to be courageous and brave. It's a risk, but a risk worth taking. The community moment allows us to hear each other's stories. It may be one of the most important things that we do here every week. When we started Kansas City Oasis, I way undervalued how pivotal that community moment element would be. I was astonished to see, I still am, so many people willing to get up and be vulnerable and then get up in public speaking. I mean, think about like the number one fear for most people. But then to go on and be frank about so many life challenges. I recall one very distinctly where one of our members talked about sucking, and this is how she put it, at committing suicide. And this was early on. And I even knew it was a risk because when she gave me her full script and read it over, should I do it? I'm like, yes, like this is really an incredible story. It's powerful, and other people, I think, will be able to resonate with it, something we don't talk about openly in public. And what resulted was a feeling of authenticity and safety for people to start sharing their life and struggles with each other, which you do not see in many other settings. Her courage and vulnerability built part of the foundation we stand upon today, so that other courageous Oasians, like Taylor Gibson last week, can also share their stories with courage and vulnerability, living out their authentic selves. This community of ours has the potential to allow you to live authentically by your own script. And if you're like me, you may also be on your some thousandth draft of that script. It's always changing and evolving. And I've come to celebrate that because that's pretty much what it means to be human. So how can we all be a supportive community that first celebrates each other's life choices rather than qualifying them? First, I suggest that we become more curious, and not about necessarily other people, but more curious with ourselves. So, if you have a strong reaction to someone's life choice, that could be here, it could be outside of here. Be curious about your own strong reaction. If it's striking a nerve, it could be a very legitimate concern or something that you need to personally explore. So I challenge you to lean in to that discomfort and make it an opportunity for self-reflection. It's okay to feel uncomfortable. It's okay to feel anxious. I think we often run from these feelings when actually to feel them and then process them and learn from them and moving on is the more healthier approach. And if you need to, take the chance to talk to a trusted friend. Don't do it online, or talk to a professional. Second, listen more than you speak. Just listen. As Americans, we're not the best at this. We tend to always think, what's our response going to be next? So when someone shares with you their life, don't argue and don't give unsolicited advice. I know that when I first learned about polyamory, I had a very strong reaction, just like that Methodist woman in that Sunday school group that day. All the objections and attempts to state why that simply just can't work flowed right out of my mouth. And when that friend of mine was sharing their life with me, it was my job that day just to listen and not disqualify why that life choice just won't work. Lastly, simply be more accommodating. And I think we do a good job of that here. And I think we should never just get comfortable thinking, we've got this down. But being accommodating is really important. It's where the small things matter. If we have a potluck, I am happy that we want to make sure there are vegan and vegetarian options. Just like if you guys all end up becoming vegan and vegetarian, I sure hope you offer some carnivore stuff on there still. You know, got to have something for everyone at the table. We are creating a unique space in our society, and it may be one reason why it is working. New York Times columnist David Brooks wrote, I think 2 weeks in a column called The Art of Thinking Well. He said, "But I'd say that if social life can get us into trouble, social life can also get us out. After all, think of how you really persuade people. Do you do it by writing thoughtful essays that carefully marshal facts? That works some of the time. But the real way to persuade people is to create an attractive community that people want to join. If you do that, they'll bend their opinions to yours. If you want to be reasonable, create groups where it's cool to be reasonable." I think we're definitely building an attractive community where it is cool to be reasonable. I can totally stand behind that vision. Empowered by reason and connected by compassion, we can all live a healthy and satisfying life beyond the script. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions? We have just a few minutes for some Q&A. If anyone has a question? Anyone? Anyone? Oh, all right.
Do y'all have this available so that we can listen to it again afterwards?
Yes, we do. Yeah, we have a podcast, and they're pretty quick at turning those around. Usually within a day or two, it'll be up. Martin's, she's over there. Yeah, got that. Anyone else have? She's busy. Anyone else have a question? Oh, okay.
So, Helen, where do you get the best biscuits and gravy around here?
I don't eat it very often because it's like getting drunk the night prior, and you're like, what did I just do? I always regret it afterwards. Is this on? Is this live? I'm not really sure. I haven't been to the Mill Inn. We should all take a road trip to Excelsior Springs, where our board member Dennis Rowe lives still. But I'm a big fan of, is it Corner Cafe? It's actually pretty darn good. Because, you can get the mix of gravy wrong. These are important things in life, so they really are.
I was just wondering, I was raised very religious, so overcoming the scripts is quite difficult. I was wondering if you had anything to say about that. What we're raised with is like programming.
It's a lifelong journey, and I think for a lot of us, it depends on the person. So sometimes having great friends, and I think men, I've noticed this in even with my, this, not just Oasis, Kansas City, but a lot of talking to men who have left that. Men interact very differently in our society than women. So we are much more likely to talk to a friend, be frank and vulnerable, and that helps, myself process all of that. But when you don't naturally have that built into our society because you're supposed to be strong men and we just talk about sports and whatever bull crap, which is not healthy, that's when sometimes a therapist is much better. Or take a chance and share your life with the people, that you've gotten to know in our community groups. They're good opportunities to meet people. To kind of process that stuff too. To answer your question, so really I think it's a matter of friends, and then if it's really that deep, if you think about religious programming, a therapist, you want a skilled professional to take you on that journey.